You've done it again. You're standing directly in front of someone you've met at least 3 times, maybe 4, and their name is just gone. Not even hovering at the tip of your tongue, just completely, cleanly absent, like it was never filed anywhere in the first place. And the worst part isn't even the forgetting. It's the next 12 seconds of pure improvised theatre you're about to perform. Subtly angling your body, desperately hoping someone else in the room says their name first, or that their phone rings, or that the building catches fire. We've all been there, sure. But the people who do this most frequently, who chronically, consistently forget names, are not careless or rude, and they are almost certainly not as unintelligent as they've been silently led to believe. There's actually something very specific happening in their brains, and once you understand it, you'll never feel guilty about it the same way again. The cognitive chaos of meeting someone new. So let's start with when you meet someone new. Your brain is doing an enormous amount of work simultaneously, reading their face, registering tone and figuring out context, calculating where you stand socially and whether this person likes you or whether you even like them, thinking about what you're supposed to say next. Your working memory, the short-term holding space in your prefrontal cortex, is essentially juggling 6 things at once. And into that exact moment of cognitive chaos, someone hands you a single arbitrary sound, their name. Hi, I'm Kevin. Kevin. Okay, Kevin doesn't mean anything. It doesn't connect to anything you already know. It doesn't trigger a concept, an image, a feeling, or an association. It just sits there, isolated, in a brain that is, frankly, too busy to babysit it. The Baker-Baker paradox. Psychologists actually have a name for why this happens. In 1987, researchers McWeeny and Ellis published a fascinating study demonstrating what's now called the Baker-Baker paradox. They told one group of participants that a person in a photo was a baker by profession, and told a separate group that the same person's surname was Baker. Days later, the people who learned the occupation remembered it far more easily than the people who learned it as a name. Same word, completely different retention. Because the word baker as a job activates a whole web of associations: flour, bread, early mornings, warmth. As a name, it activates nothing. It floats there, rootless. Names, by their very nature, are semantically empty, and your brain, efficient machine that it is, preferentially holds on to things that mean something. The emotional texture of memory. Think about the last funeral you attended. You probably remember the smell of the flowers, the specific silence in the room, who ended up crying the most, a sentence someone said that resonated with you deep in your chest. You do not remember what was written on the order of service. Because your brain made a decision without consulting you about what mattered, and it was not the printed text. It was never the printed text. Names are the order of service. Everything else about a person is the funeral. The next in line effect and social anxiety. Now, where it might get a little uncomfortable because it's more personal than most people want to admit, a significant portion of chronic name forgetters are people who are extremely in their own heads during social interactions, though in an anxious way rather than an arrogant one. While the other person is introducing themselves, these people are internally narrating. Am I making enough eye contact? Is this handshake too firm? Did I just interrupt them? The name enters, briefly, and then the internal monologue bulldozes straight over it. This is actually documented. There's a phenomenon called the next in line effect, first documented in 1973 by psychologist Malcolm Brenner, where people waiting to speak in a group, anticipating their own turn, show dramatically reduced memory for what the person directly before them said, because, in their head, they'd already moved on, already preparing the next thing to say. They're editing themselves in real time. And people who live with social anxiety, or even just a hyperactive self-awareness, are essentially stuck in that mode permanently. Never quite here, always half a step into what comes next, which means the moment a name is actually offered to them, they're already somewhere else. Reframing the problem. If that's you, here's the reframe. You don't have a memory problem, you have a preoccupation problem. Those are very different things. There's also something worth saying about the people on the other end of this, the people whose names get forgotten, because the emotional sting of it is genuinely real, and it would be unjust to pretend otherwise. Having your name forgotten, especially repeatedly, lands like a small but pointed message. You didn't matter enough to stick. That's how it feels, even if it's completely wrong. That's what the brain hears, and the brain doesn't always take the rational approach. The person who forgot your name probably thought about the conversation you had afterwards. They remember what you said about your sister, or the specific way you laughed at something. Maybe you had an odd take that stuck with them. They were there, they were just not quite there for the name part. Associative thinking versus rote labels. And this is the thing about memory that most people fundamentally misunderstand. It's not a recording. Your brain doesn't store experiences the way a hard drive stores files. It stores impressions, emotions, patterns, fragments. And it prioritizes ruthlessly. High emotion? Stored. Surprising? Stored. Connected to something you already know? Stored. One arbitrary syllable handed to you at the exact moment you were busy trying to seem normal in front of a stranger. Good luck. People who forget names easily often have something else in common. They tend to be highly associative thinkers. Their memory is richly contextual. They remember stories and feelings, the look on someone's face when they said something that mattered. Ask them what someone was wearing at a party 3 years ago. They might actually tell you. Ask them the name of the person standing next to them. Blank. Because their brain was cataloguing everything except the label. This isn't a flaw in the mind. It's just a particular architecture. One that is, frankly, better suited to storytelling, to emotional attunement, to the kind of listening that makes people feel genuinely understood, and worse suited to the specific mechanical task of holding and remembering what someone was called under social pressure. Building the bridge. None of this means you shouldn't try to get better at it, by the way. Repeating someone's name back immediately when you meet, connecting it to a visual or a person you already know, these things work. And they work because you're doing manually what your brain refuses to do automatically. Building the association that wasn't there. You're essentially constructing a little bridge between Kevin and something that already has a place in your mental landscape. But the shame spiral, the quiet, low-grade belief that forgetting names makes you an uncaring person, someone who moves through the world without really registering other people, that part is wrong. And it's worth saying clearly, because a lot of people carry it without ever examining where it came from or whether it's actually true. You are not absent or dismissive. You are someone whose brain prioritizes differently, gets hijacked by its own internal weather, and sometimes fails at the single least interesting thing about a person, the arbitrary sound their parents assigned them before they'd done a single thing worth remembering. The name was always the least of it. What you remember about people, the real stuff, the texture of who they are, that part? That's still there. That's been there the whole time.